next question. Why don't we pass the Versailles Treaty? 1917. War ends within 18 months. What the United States does by getting into this war, you cannot underestimate the power of the United States here. We are not as strong as England, but we are as industrialized as England. And so if the problem with the trench warfare is that we are at a 1-to-1 advantage, what happens when the U.S. joins? Easily past that 3-to-1. That's what stops it. But of course you're dealing with trench warfare. So what does that mean? 3-to-1, heavy losses. It's a big price. It's not a cakewalk. Nevertheless, once we're in it, within 18 months the war's over. So we know once we get in there, and everybody knows that once we get into this. So right as the war is starting, within 5 or 6 months, we know the direction here. And just to let you know, the way the war ends is that we have Germany, we have Belgium, we have England. As soon as the United States, that's France, I'm sorry. As soon as the United States starts getting into this war and pushing backwards, the Germans themselves start questioning their leaders. Remember the whole concept of the Kaiser, boom, 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 and the people running out? Remember, prior to this, what was Russia doing, aside from the fact that they were just losing? Right before the United States ends up closing the deal, Russia surrenders to Germany. Why? Because they had a revolution. They had 2 revolutions. It's very important to understand 2 revolutions, because sometimes people will say, well, the reason why the Soviet Union became communist is that they didn't like the Tsar. They didn't overthrow the Tsar. Democrats overthrew the Tsar. The communists overthrew a democracy, the Kerensky government, about 7 months old. Nevertheless, the point that really caused this is that the suffering of the war. They were doing such a miserable job that they surrendered. Even though at that time it was clear this war is almost over. So Russia loses completely. Germany ends up having its own revolution at home. And that's, they overthrow the Kaiser. And as you look at Kaiser, that's really a derivation off of Caesar, right? They overthrow the Kaiser. And that's how Germany surrenders. Question. Why isn't Germany, when we said of all those people that didn't accept it, why would Germany accept the Treaty of Versailles?
Stop being fat.
It's the end of the war. They have no choice. This isn't something that they can choose to accept or reject. They are the ones that the terms are being given to. They have no choice. So they obviously are going to accept the Treaty of Versailles, because if not, the war keeps going. Does that make sense? That's part of surrender, is that you accept the terms. Those are the terms. So once that happens, that means Germany is lost. What about Italy? Remember, Italy was actually on Germany's side, and then right towards the end of the war, they jump in. Does that mean that are they victors? No, everybody knew that they were on Germany's side, and they did not push the end of the war. This was not something that was anything that they did. The big people that were in this war was France and England. And they each lost millions of people. More people, French and England, more French and English died in World War I than French and English died in World War II. This is their bloodier war. Okay, Germany had comparable figures as well. Germany. Okay, so why is this a big deal? The United States, as soon as we're in this, very quickly, Wilson pushed 14 points. What are the 14 points? This is the American justification for the war. This is why we are in it. And if you read the 14 points, and you actually have these in your primary documents, one of these points is that we're going to create a league. What is the promise? He basically says in the 14 points, we are doing this to protect the rights of neutrals. So what is the whole purpose of the league? To create a law. Law is where we have the rights. Remember that whole concept? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. All countries are equal. All people are equal. I shouldn't have to have an alliance with this big brother over here. I should be able to have my rights of sovereignty respected without a military alliance. If I'm Luxembourg, if I'm Switzerland, if I'm Belgium, I should be able to live without fear that Germany's going to take me over. Is this not the exact same concept that the American democracy is based off of? The rights. Each country has rights. We take the League of Nations, and the goal is we are going to apply the rule of law on an international level. Is this not the height of progressive mentality? Progressivism is the faith in progress. We can fix even war. And the Americans were absolutely supportive of this. This is the problem, remember. Realpolitik versus ideology, right? Where is the United States? Very strongly on the whole ideology thing, right? Rule of law. That is our ideology. What about this person? This is where the empires are. And this would include not just Germany, but also England. This is why we don't get into the war. So if you look at both of these purposes, what is the purpose of war? So purpose of war under realpolitik. What's the purpose of war? To get stuff. Spoils, right? I don't need this. That's like $1.50 worth. You guys understand spoils. That's the goodies that you get as a result. Maybe it's land, maybe it's money, maybe it's respect. You're getting something as a result of this war. What does the rule of law want? Purpose of war. Defense. From the rule of law perspective, war is a failure of negotiation. Does that make sense? On the realpolitik side, war is a means to an end. I want more respect. I declare the war. That's what Germany was doing over and over again. I want to unite. I'm going to create a treaty with Denmark because I know I'm going to break that treaty, get the war, get people behind me. I'm going to do a very similar thing and declare war on France so that I can get behind and get this unification. I want World War I so that I can redress the balance. War is a means to an end. That's a pragmatic, realpolitik approach. But under the ideological approach, war is a failure of a negotiation. We broke down somewhere. The only reason why we have to fight is defending ourselves. And again, why did the United States get into World War I? To defend the rights of neutrals. This is strongly an American ideal. And the United States is very supportive of this. So when the war is over, we're going to look at the Treaty of Versailles. So we're all there. Now the only difficulty here is that the U.S. is the only head of state. What does that mean? President Wilson personally goes there. He doesn't send ambassadors. What's the difference between a head of state and an ambassador? Training. Ambassadors are there all the time. They're professional at being able to negotiate. That's what they do as ambassadors. Now, if you are the realpolitik versus the ideology, who's got more experience with negotiation? These guys or these guys? These guys, by far, have more experience because they are fighting wars all the time. They're using it as a tool, one of many tools at their arsenal. In the United States, we have been diplomatically isolated. We have very little experience, which is part of the reasons why we sent Wilson. Well, let me rephrase that. Wilson sent himself. He's the non-professional in the group. Why does this matter? Because the war is what's going to be done. Wilson's objective, Wilson's number one goal, number one, the League of Nations. That's the number one goal. What about for Germany and France and England? What are their goals? Well, Germany, what was their goals? Their goals were to expand. Well, obviously they lose, and so what does that mean? Well, that's gone. What about England and France? Their goals were to push Germany down. That was their goal for this war. So they get together, they meet at Versailles in France. Treaty of Versailles. Versailles is like the old palace, right outside of Paris. They're meeting at Versailles. And the first thing Wilson says is we need to have a League of Nations. And the first thing that they say is we can't do that. We have to deal with this problem of the war first. And frankly, we want Germany to pay through the nose. And Wilson says, no, no, no. There should be no winners and no losers. Because remember, it was a failure. Both you and Germany were at risk here, right? It's a failure of negotiation. You guys both rejected our opportunities to be the referee. You both lost here. England and France said, well, okay, we understand that, but the fact is I don't know if I have my numbers here. I don't have the numbers here. 1.2 million, I think, in England, 2.1 million in France. I don't know what the numbers are, but literally millions of people are dead. And they say, you have to understand, we have to go back to our countries and tell our citizens, tell the wives, the sisters, the daughters, the children, the brothers, that their kids died because it was our fault. But it wasn't really our fault. It wasn't. Let's just go back and look at the evidence. And isn't it true that Germany is more at fault than we are? And this was the first negotiation. Isn't it true that Germany is more at fault than we are? And Will said, no, you guys are all at fault. Well, he's not a professional. They are. By the time we're done, that's the very first thing he does. Or they do. Where am I going? Here we are. Is that they admit, and England admits this, will accept this, admits that Germany is at fault. And so Germany has to admit, Germany has to accept fault. As soon as we do that, everything else follows. Okay, we'll do your league. But since Germany is at fault, let's say I'm the baseball team and they're all a bunch of kids playing ball. If it's Johnny who hit the ball into the window and broke the window, don't you think it's Johnny that has to pay for that window? And so we immediately say, if Germany accepts fault, Germany has to pay money. And by this time, Wilson says, well, okay, it makes sense. We call that reparations. And again, we go back to the kid with the baseball field. Not only does Johnny pay for the window, but shouldn't Johnny have to go and take some lessons never to do that again? In fact, shouldn't we take Johnny's baseball away and bat? And at the end, Wilson says, as long as you agree to the League of Nations, I'll accept this. So by the time we're done, what we have is a Treaty of Versailles that has three main components. Number one, Germany is at fault. Number two, Germany pays billions of dollars. Number three, Germany prohibited from ever having military again, except for a police force. If we were to go back and ask England before 1914, what are you hoping to get out of this war? What would their answer be? Well, I'd like to just totally destroy Germany, have them pay us a tribute, and make sure they never have a military again. What would we call that in other pragmatic language? So what did Wilson gain from this? Nothing. So then I go back to the question. Go away. Go away. Go away. Go away. Stop. There we go. Why did U.S. reject treaty? And now you guys have an answer. What's the answer?
Because you sold yourself.
Because you sold your soul. U.S. enters to ensure law. No winners, no losers, right? England and France get all spoils. And if that's the case, what then is the League? If not organized oppression of Germany. And isn't that exactly what they wanted? Let's put this in very simple language. You guys realize? Okay, ready for this? It's very simple language. The Americans are in favor after the 14 points. We are in favor of joining the war. We are very supportive of it. A few holdouts, because some of them don't think that we could actually be ideological on this. But most of America, strongly supportive. Germany is the height of aggression. When we come back and Wilson brings the treaty back, he has negotiated this. The American reaction is very plain language. You got suckered. They played. And you let it happen. They said, we'll take the treaty, but let's think about the League of Nations. If the League of Nations is there to enforce the law, and the new law is that Germany can never do anything ever again, what kind of law is that? Isn't that exactly what maybe Europe may really like, actually? Because it furthers the spoils of war. This is why the Americans rejected it not once, but twice. Wilson, height of progressive optimism. He truly thinks as long as you've got law there, we will end war. Remember his famous line? This is the war to end all wars. He's thinking that because he thinks the League will end it forever. And the Americans look at this and say, you got suckered. The English and the French played you, and they got everything that they wanted. And you know what else? They wouldn't have won that war unless it was us, unless we got involved with this. So they used us to win their war and to further this empire that we don't like. So we reject the League. So that means, good question, how much money does the United States get from the Treaty of Versailles? Nothing. But how much money did the United States want from the Treaty of Versailles? Nothing. We didn't want it. There were supposed to be no winners, no losers. In the end, the United States conducts a separate peace. We don't accept the Treaty of Versailles, so we do a Treaty of Berlin. Do you know when this treaty is finally passed? I think it's 1923, maybe it's 1924. I can't remember exactly which year this is. It's like 5 years after the war. We reject the League, we reject the treaty because we think it's corrupt.